The rain drummed against the towering glass windows of the Metropolitan Museum of Ancient Civilizations as Margaret Chen adjusted her worn canvas bag and approached the imposing reception desk. Her weathered hands clutched a manila folder containing research that had consumed 3 years of her life, and her modest cardigan looked distinctly out of place among the polished marble columns and gleaming display cases that housed priceless artifacts from forgotten civilizations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 72, Maggie had the appearance of someone who spent more time in public libraries than prestigious academic institutions. Her silver hair was pulled into a practical bun, and her comfortable walking shoes suggested someone accustomed to long hours of standing rather than the expensive Italian leather favored by museum dignitaries. The security cameras captured her unremarkable approach, but they couldn't record the brilliant mind that had spent decades unraveling mysteries that had confounded the world's leading experts. The Metropolitan Museum's reputation for scholarly excellence attracted researchers from every continent, but its doors remained firmly closed to those lacking proper academic credentials or institutional backing. Tom Rodriguez had worked museum security for 15 years, and he possessed the practiced eye of someone who could distinguish serious scholars from amateur enthusiasts within moments of their arrival. His assessment of the elderly woman approaching his station was swift and decisive. The morning shift at the Metropolitan Museum of Ancient Civilizations began with the usual parade of credentialed researchers, graduate students, and visiting academics who formed the backbone of serious archaeological study. Tom Rodriguez positioned himself behind the security desk with the confident bearing of someone who understood that his role extended far beyond checking identification cards. He served as the first line of defense against cranks, treasure hunters, and well-meaning but unqualified amateur historians who regularly attempted to access collections that required years of specialized training to properly appreciate. Margaret Chen's approach triggered none of the usual signals that indicated serious academic purpose. Her clothing suggested someone comfortable with practical necessities rather than professional appearances, and her manila folder appeared to contain photocopied materials rather than the bound presentations that serious researchers typically carried. Most telling, she lacked the confident stride that characterized scholars accustomed to institutional respect and immediate access to restricted materials. "Good morning," Maggie said quietly, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who expected to be questioned rather than welcomed. "I'm here to request access to the Egyptian collection, specifically materials related to hieroglyphic translations from the Saqqara complex." She placed her identification and research summary on the desk with careful precision, though her hands showed a slight tremor that could have been nervousness or simply the natural consequence of advanced age. Rodriguez glanced at her driver's license and visitor request form with the perfunctory attention of someone who processed dozens of similar requests every week. Margaret Chen, age 72, listed her occupation as independent researcher and her institutional affiliation as none. Her home address indicated a modest apartment in a Chicago suburb, and her emergency contact information suggested someone without extensive family connections or professional networks that might vouch for her credibility. "Ma'am, access to our specialized collections requires approval from the curatorial staff," Rodriguez explained with practiced patience. "Independent researchers need to demonstrate specific academic qualifications and provide detailed research proposals that justify access to materials that are often irreplaceable and extremely valuable. Do you have letters of recommendation from recognized institutions or published work in peer-reviewed journals that would support your request?" Maggie's response revealed the careful preparation of someone who understood the obstacles she faced, but remained determined to pursue her research despite institutional barriers. "I don't have traditional academic credentials," she admitted with quiet dignity, "but I've been studying ancient Egyptian linguistics for over 40 years. My research focuses on translation patterns that I believe have been misinterpreted by conventional scholarship, particularly regarding texts found in recently excavated chambers." The folder she opened contained photocopied hieroglyphic sequences, hand-drawn charts, mapping symbol relationships, and pages of notes written in cramped handwriting that reflected countless hours of solitary study. To Rodriguez's untrained eye, the materials appeared to represent the kind of amateur enthusiasm that characterized hobbyists rather than serious scholars. He had encountered similar presentations dozens of times, usually from retirees who had developed passionate interests in ancient civilizations but lacked the rigorous training necessary for professional-level research. Mrs. Chen, I appreciate your interest in ancient Egyptian culture, Rodriguez continued with the diplomatic tone he had perfected for such encounters. However, our research collections are restricted to individuals with appropriate academic credentials or institutional sponsorship. Independent researchers typically need to work through universities or recognized archaeological organizations to gain access to primary source materials. What Rodriguez couldn't discern from his cursory examination was that Maggie's translations contained insights that challenged fundamental assumptions about ancient Egyptian religious practices and architectural symbolism. Her analysis suggested that certain hieroglyphic sequences had been consistently misinterpreted by mainstream Egyptology, leading to incomplete understanding of the spiritual and practical purposes behind pyramid construction. More significantly, her work indicated that recently discovered chambers in the Saqqara complex contained information that could revolutionize archaeological understanding of ancient engineering capabilities. The rejection stung, though Maggie had expected it based on her previous experiences at other prestigious institutions. Her research had been dismissed by the Smithsonian's Egyptian collection curator, politely declined by specialists at the British Museum, and relegated to preliminary review status at the Cairo Museum of Antiquities. Each rejection followed the same pattern: initial interest in her unconventional theories, followed by dismissal once her lack of formal credentials became apparent. "I understand your position," Maggie replied, gathering her materials with the resigned efficiency of someone accustomed to disappointment. "Would it be possible to speak with someone from the Egyptian department, even briefly? I believe my research addresses some inconsistencies in current translations that might be of interest to your scholars." Rodriguez consulted his computer screen, noting that Dr. Richard Blackwood, the museum's director of Egyptian antiquities, maintained strict policies regarding unsolicited research presentations. Blackwood's reputation within the museum hierarchy reflected his success in maintaining scholarly standards while protecting the institution's resources from amateur interference. His appointment calendar remained filled with meetings involving established researchers whose work contributed to the museum's prestigious reputation. "Dr. Blackwood's schedule is completely booked for the next several months," Rodriguez explained with finality. "I can provide you with information about our public lecture series and educational programs that might interest someone with your background in ancient history. We also have an excellent volunteer program for individuals who want to contribute to museum operations while learning from our professional staff." The suggestion of volunteer work represented the institutional response to amateur enthusiasm, channeling genuine interest into activities that supported museum operations without risking damage to valuable collections or scholarly reputations. Maggie understood that her research would never receive serious consideration through conventional channels, but she also recognized that her discoveries were too important to abandon, simply because she lacked the proper institutional credentials. As she walked through the museum's public galleries, surrounded by artifacts that represented thousands of years of human civilization, Maggie reflected on the irony of her situation. The hieroglyphic texts displayed in glass cases contained secrets that she had spent years decoding, yet the institutions responsible for preserving these treasures remained closed to insights that challenged established interpretations. Her translation work suggested that ancient Egyptian engineers possessed knowledge that had been lost to modern scholarship. But her discoveries would remain hidden unless she could find alternative approaches to validation. The Metropolitan Museum's Egyptian collection included artifacts from excavations that had shaped 20th-century understanding of ancient civilization. But Maggie's research indicated that some of the most significant discoveries had been misinterpreted due to incomplete translation methods. Her analysis suggested that certain hieroglyphic sequences contained technical information about architectural engineering and astronomical calculations that exceeded conventional estimates of ancient capabilities. Outside the museum, Chicago's afternoon rain had intensified, creating the kind of weather that encouraged people to seek indoor comfort rather than pursuing ambitious projects. Maggie stood under the museum's classical portico, watching well-dressed scholars and university students navigate the marble steps with the confident efficiency of people whose work received institutional support and professional recognition. Their access to research materials and collaboration opportunities represented everything that remained beyond her reach, despite decades of dedicated study. The folder in her canvas bag contained translations that she believed could prevent future archaeological disasters, but her warnings would go unheeded unless she could find ways to reach decision-makers who controlled excavation policies and safety protocols. Her research had uncovered patterns in ancient texts that suggested specific dangers associated with certain excavation techniques, information that could protect modern archaeological teams from the kinds of accidents that had become tragically common in recent years. Margaret Chen's journey to this moment of rejection had begun 3 years earlier with a phone call that shattered her quiet retirement. Her daughter Lisa, a promising young archaeologist, had been killed in what officials described as an unfortunate but unforeseeable cave-in at an excavation site in Egypt. The incident reports cited unstable geological conditions and inadequate safety precautions, suggesting that Lisa's death resulted from a combination of bad luck and insufficient risk assessment. But Maggie's investigation into the circumstances surrounding her daughter's death revealed disturbing patterns that challenged the official explanations. Several archaeological team members had died in similar incidents over the past decade, all involving excavations that pushed deeper into pyramid complexes despite warnings about structural instability. The common factor linking these tragedies was the involvement of prestigious institutions, whose pursuit of groundbreaking discoveries seemed to override prudent safety considerations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lisa had been working on translations of recently discovered hieroglyphic texts when she died, and her preliminary notes suggested that ancient engineers had included specific warnings about excavation techniques that could trigger structural failures. The texts appeared to contain detailed instructions for safely accessing hidden chambers, information that could have prevented the collapse that killed her and 3 colleagues. But the archaeological team had proceeded with modern excavation methods that ignored these ancient safety guidelines. Maggie's subsequent research into Egyptian engineering texts had confirmed her worst suspicions about the patterns that had led to her daughter's death. Ancient pyramid builders had possessed sophisticated understanding of structural engineering and geological stability, knowledge that they had encoded in hieroglyphic warnings that modern archaeologists consistently misinterpreted or ignored. The texts contained precise instructions for accessing pyramid chambers without triggering the collapse mechanisms that had been deliberately designed to protect sacred spaces from unauthorized intrusion. The most disturbing discovery in Maggie's research was that several leading Egyptologists had documented these warning texts, but had dismissed them as religious superstition rather than practical engineering guidance. Dr. Richard Blackwood himself had published papers describing hieroglyphic sequences that Maggie now recognized as detailed safety protocols, but his translations had interpreted technical instructions as spiritual metaphors. His academic reputation had been built on interpretations that Maggie's work proved to be fundamentally incorrect. The rain that drummed against the museum windows seemed to echo the persistence that had driven Maggie through 3 years of solitary research, translating texts that revealed the sophisticated engineering knowledge of ancient civilizations. Her work had been conducted in public libraries and community college computer labs, using photocopied materials and online databases that provided access to primary sources without requiring institutional credentials. The academic establishment that had rejected her possessed resources that would have accelerated her research exponentially, but their closed doors had forced her to develop alternative methods that had ultimately led to insights that challenged their fundamental assumptions. Walking back toward the museum entrance, Maggie made a decision that would transform her approach to sharing her discoveries. If traditional academic channels remained closed to her research, she would find ways to reach the people whose safety depended on understanding the warnings that ancient engineers had encoded in hieroglyphic texts. Her translations contained information that could prevent future tragedies like the one that had killed Lisa, but protection of archaeological teams would require convincing institutions to reconsider their excavation methods. The security desk where Tom Rodriguez continued processing visitor requests represented more than just an administrative checkpoint. It symbolized the barriers that separated amateur enthusiasm from professional recognition. But Maggie's research had progressed far beyond amateur status, even though she lacked the credentials that would have granted her access to the resources she needed to complete her work. Her discoveries about ancient engineering knowledge could revolutionize archaeological practices, but only if she could find ways to reach decision-makers who controlled excavation policies. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the museum's marble floors, Maggie prepared for the next phase of her campaign to gain recognition for research that could save lives and unlock secrets that had remained hidden for thousands of years. The rejection she had experienced at prestigious institutions represented obstacles rather than final verdicts, and her determination to honor her daughter's memory by preventing similar tragedies would drive her to pursue alternatives that the academic establishment had never anticipated. The Metropolitan Museum of Ancient Civilizations closed its doors that evening, with its reputation for scholarly excellence intact. But its curators remained unaware that they had dismissed research that could have enhanced their understanding of ancient civilizations, while protecting modern archaeologists from dangers that ancient engineers had specifically warned against. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities for Maggie to pursue recognition for work that challenged established interpretations and offered insights that could bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern archaeological practice. The University of Illinois Archaeological Library provided sanctuary for researchers whose work fell outside mainstream academic channels, and Margaret Chen had claimed a corner table near the ancient languages section where she could spread her materials without attracting unwanted attention. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced above translations that challenged fundamental assumptions about Egyptian hieroglyphic interpretation. Her canvas bag contained photocopied texts from 7 different museum collections, acquired through patient requests and occasional sympathetic librarians who appreciated genuine scholarly curiosity. Dr. Sarah Hassan emerged from the stacks carrying an armload of linguistic reference materials, her expression reflecting the focused concentration of someone pursuing specific research objectives. As the university's leading expert in comparative ancient languages, Hassan had built her reputation on meticulous analysis of textual variants and translation methodologies that revealed subtle meanings often overlooked by conventional scholarship. Her encounter with the elderly woman, surrounded by hieroglyphic transcriptions, represented an unexpected deviation from her planned research schedule. Maggie glanced up from her work as Hassan approached, recognizing the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to academic environments. The younger woman's professional attire and confident bearing marked her as a legitimate scholar, though her expression suggested curiosity rather than the dismissive skepticism that Maggie had encountered at prestigious institutions. Hassan's eyes focused on the hieroglyphic charts spread across Maggie's table with the intensity of someone who recognized sophisticated analytical work regardless of its source. "Those translation matrices are fascinating," Hassan observed, gesturing toward Maggie's hand-drawn symbol relationship charts. "Are you working on Middle Kingdom religious texts or something more recent from the New Kingdom period? Your methodology appears to incorporate linguistic evolution patterns that most scholars overlook when analyzing ceremonial inscriptions." The unexpected recognition of her work's sophistication caught Maggie off guard, though she responded with the cautious enthusiasm of someone who rarely encountered genuine professional interest in her research. "Actually, I'm focusing on engineering and construction texts from the Saqqara complex, particularly inscriptions that appear to contain technical information rather than religious symbolism. Most published translations interpret these passages as metaphorical descriptions of spiritual concepts, but I believe they contain literal instructions for architectural and excavation procedures." Hassan's eyebrows rose with the sharp attention of a specialist encountering potentially significant alternative interpretations. Her own work had identified inconsistencies in conventional hieroglyphic translations, particularly regarding texts that seemed to contain practical information disguised as religious metaphor. The possibility that engineering knowledge had been systematically misclassified as spiritual symbolism represented exactly the kind of breakthrough that could reshape understanding of ancient Egyptian technical capabilities. "That's a provocative thesis," Hassan replied, settling into the chair across from Maggie with obvious interest. "May I examine some of your analysis? I've been researching similar inconsistencies in pyramid texts that seem to describe construction techniques using language that conventional scholarship dismisses as purely ceremonial. If your interpretations identify literal engineering content, they might support theories about ancient technical knowledge that I've been developing." Maggie's response revealed the careful preparation of someone who had spent months refining arguments that challenged established academic positions. She selected several pages from her research folder, choosing examples that demonstrated her translation methodology without revealing her most controversial conclusions about excavation safety protocols. The hieroglyphic sequences she shared contained instructions for accessing pyramid chambers using techniques that differed significantly from modern archaeological approaches. These passages describe specific procedures for entering sealed chambers without triggering structural collapses, Maggie explained, pointing to symbol groups that conventional translations had interpreted as descriptions of spiritual purification rituals. "The ancient engineers appear to have designed protective mechanisms that could be safely bypassed using precise techniques, but only if excavators followed exact protocols that they encoded in these texts. Hassan studied the translations with growing excitement, recognizing analytical sophistication that exceeded the capabilities of amateur enthusiasts. Maggie's work identified linguistic patterns that Hassan had noticed in her own research but had never been able to interpret convincingly. The collaboration between hieroglyphic symbols and mathematical relationships suggested that ancient Egyptian engineers had possessed knowledge of structural mechanics that had been lost to modern scholarship. "Your interpretation of these load-bearing calculations is remarkable," Hassan observed, examining charts that mapped symbol relationships to architectural principles. "If these texts actually contain engineering specifications, they could explain how ancient builders achieved structural stability in pyramid construction that modern engineers struggle to replicate. Have you attempted to correlate these instructions with actual archaeological excavation results?" The question touched on the most painful aspect of Maggie's research. Though she maintained professional composure while explaining how her work related to contemporary archaeological practices. "My daughter was an archaeologist who died in an excavation accident at Saqqara 3 years ago. The official investigation concluded that structural instability caused the cave-in that killed her and 3 colleagues. But my research suggests that the ancient texts contain specific warnings about the excavation techniques that were used in that dig." Hassan's expression shifted from academic interest to sympathetic understanding as she processed the personal tragedy that had motivated Maggie's research. The death of archaeological team members represented the most serious concern facing contemporary excavation projects, and the possibility that ancient texts contained safety information that could prevent such accidents carried implications that extended far beyond theoretical scholarly debate. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Hassan said quietly, her voice carrying genuine compassion for someone whose scholarly pursuits had been shaped by profound personal grief. "If your translations identify safety protocols that could protect archaeological teams, they deserve serious attention from institutions that control excavation policies. Have you presented your findings to organizations that oversee field operations in Egypt?" Maggie's response revealed the frustrating cycle of rejections that had characterized her attempts to gain recognition for research that could save lives. "I've approached the Smithsonian, the British Museum, the Cairo Museum of Antiquities, and the Metropolitan Museum here in Chicago. Every institution has declined to review my work because I lack proper academic credentials. They dismiss my research as amateur speculation without examining the evidence that supports my conclusions." The institutional barriers that Maggie described reflected systemic problems within academic archaeology that Hassan had observed throughout her career. Established scholars often rejected alternative interpretations that challenged their published work, particularly when those challenges came from researchers outside recognized academic hierarchies. The result was intellectual stagnation that prevented innovative discoveries from reaching the practitioners whose work could benefit from new insights. "The academic establishment can be frustratingly closed to outside perspectives," Hassan acknowledged with the diplomatic tone of someone who navigated institutional politics while pursuing genuine scholarly inquiry. "However, your research appears to contain insights that could significantly advance our understanding of ancient engineering capabilities. Would you be willing to collaborate on presenting your findings through legitimate academic channels that might overcome credential barriers?" The offer of professional collaboration represented exactly the opportunity that Maggie had been seeking through months of frustrating rejections. Hassan's institutional affiliation and published research record provided the academic credibility that could open doors that had remained closed to independent scholarship. More importantly, her genuine interest in the substance of Maggie's work suggested that the collaboration would be based on mutual intellectual respect rather than charitable assistance. "I would be honored to work with you," Maggie replied with carefully controlled enthusiasm. "My research contains translation evidence that I believe could prevent future archaeological accidents, but I need institutional support to reach the people who make excavation policy decisions. If your academic connections can help these discoveries reach appropriate audiences, lives could be saved." Hassan spent the next 2 hours examining Maggie's research materials with the thorough attention of someone evaluating work for potential publication in peer-reviewed journals. The translation methodology demonstrated sophisticated understanding of hieroglyphic evolution and linguistic analysis that exceeded the capabilities of amateur scholars. More significantly, the conclusions challenged fundamental assumptions about ancient Egyptian technical knowledge in ways that could reshape archaeological practices. Your work identifies engineering concepts that conventional scholarship has completely overlooked, Hassan concluded after her detailed review. These texts appear to contain instruction manuals for construction and excavation procedures that ancient engineers developed through centuries of experience with pyramid building. If your interpretations are correct, modern archaeologists have been ignoring safety protocols that could prevent exactly the kinds of accidents that have claimed lives in recent excavations. The validation from a recognized academic expert provided Maggie with the first professional confirmation that her research contained legitimate insights worthy of scholarly attention. Hassan's endorsement carried institutional weight that could overcome the credential barriers that had prevented serious consideration of work that challenged established interpretations. Their collaboration represented an opportunity to transform solitary research into recognized scholarship that could influence contemporary archaeological practices. Hassan's next suggestion revealed her understanding of how academic institutions operated and how alternative research could gain recognition through strategic presentation. The International Conference on Egyptian Archaeology is meeting next month at Northwestern University, and several sessions focus specifically on new approaches to hieroglyphic interpretation and excavation methodology. If we can prepare a joint presentation that demonstrates the practical applications of your research, it could reach exactly the audience that needs to hear these discoveries. The prospect of presenting her work at a legitimate academic conference exceeded Maggie's most optimistic expectations for gaining recognition of research that had been conducted in isolation from institutional support. Hassan's willingness to stake her professional reputation on collaboration with an independent researcher demonstrated genuine commitment to advancing knowledge rather than protecting established academic territories. "There's one particular session that would be perfect for our presentation," Hassan continued, consulting the conference program on her laptop. Dr. Richard Blackwood from the Metropolitan Museum is chairing a panel on advanced translation techniques in Egyptian archaeological research. His session specifically addresses methodology improvements that could enhance excavation safety and efficiency. The mention of Blackwood's name caused Maggie to pause, remembering her recent rejection at the Metropolitan Museum and the security guard's explanation that Blackwood's schedule remained completely booked for months. The irony of potentially presenting her research to the same scholar who had been too busy to meet with her represented exactly the kind of academic gatekeeper behavior that Hassan's collaboration could circumvent. Dr. Blackwood has a reputation for being very particular about presentation quality, Hassan explained diplomatically. His standards are extremely high, and he typically only accepts research that demonstrates exceptional rigor and originality. However, your translation work meets those criteria, and the practical implications for excavation safety should appeal to his professional interests. What Hassan didn't know was that Blackwood's academic reputation had been built partially on translations that Maggie's research proved to be fundamentally incorrect. Her work demonstrated that his published interpretations of pyramid engineering texts had missed crucial technical content, misclassifying literal construction instructions as religious metaphor. The confrontation between Maggie's discoveries and Blackwood's established scholarship would test whether academic institutions valued truth over professional prestige. The afternoon sun had shifted position by the time Hassan and Maggie completed their preliminary collaboration planning, but their partnership had already transformed the prospects for research that had been dismissed by every prestigious institution that Maggie had approached. Hassan's academic credentials and institutional connections provided the platform that could elevate independent scholarship to professional recognition, while Maggie's discoveries offered insights that could revolutionize archaeological practices. "I'll begin preparing our conference proposal immediately," Hassan promised as she gathered her materials. "Your research deserves serious attention from the archaeological community, and this collaboration could help ensure that your daughter's tragedy contributes to preventing similar losses in the future. The safety protocols you've identified in these ancient texts could protect archaeological teams worldwide." As Hassan departed with copies of Maggie's most significant translations, the University of Illinois Archaeological Library returned to its usual atmosphere of quiet scholarly activity. But the collaboration that had been forged between recognized academic expertise and innovative independent research represented exactly the kind of intellectual partnership that could bridge the gap between institutional conservatism and breakthrough discoveries. Maggie remained at her corner table, surrounded by hieroglyphic charts that contained secrets capable of transforming archaeological practices and preventing the kinds of tragedies that had shaped her research. For the first time since beginning her investigation into the circumstances surrounding her daughter's death, She possessed realistic hope that her discoveries would reach the people whose decisions could protect future archaeological teams from dangers that ancient engineers had specifically warned against. The late afternoon shadows that stretched across the library floor seemed less oppressive than the institutional barriers that had previously blocked recognition of research that challenged established academic interpretations. Hassan's collaboration provided more than just professional credibility. It offered validation that Maggie's work contained legitimate insights worthy of serious scholarly attention. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to refine their conference presentation and develop arguments that could convince skeptical academics to reconsider fundamental assumptions about ancient Egyptian engineering knowledge. The partnership between Hassan's institutional expertise and Maggie's groundbreaking discoveries represented exactly the combination of credentials and innovation that could overcome the academic establishment's resistance to alternative interpretations. Margaret Chen gathered her research materials with the satisfaction of someone whose solitary work had finally found recognition from a scholar capable of appreciating its significance. The translations that had been dismissed by prestigious museums contained information that could prevent future archaeological disasters, and Hassan's collaboration provided the academic platform necessary to reach decision-makers who controlled excavation policies. The University of Illinois Archaeological Library had witnessed the beginning of a partnership that would challenge fundamental assumptions about ancient Egyptian technical knowledge, while honoring the memory of a young archaeologist whose death had revealed dangerous gaps in contemporary excavation practices. Maggie's research contained answers that could bridge thousands of years of lost knowledge, and Hassan's academic expertise provided the key to unlocking institutional recognition for discoveries that could save lives and revolutionize archaeological understanding. The Northwestern University Conference Hall buzzed with the controlled energy of several hundred archaeologists, linguists, and museum curators who had gathered to discuss the latest developments in Egyptian research. Margaret Chen stood near the registration table, her conference badge identifying her as a collaborative researcher with the University of Illinois, though her modest appearance continued to mark her as someone outside the academic mainstream. The expensive suits and designer briefcases that characterized most attendees created a stark contrast to her practical clothing and well-worn canvas bag filled with translation materials. Dr. Sarah Hassan navigated the crowd with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to professional conferences, her presentation materials organized in a leather portfolio that projected exactly the kind of scholarly credibility that opened doors within academic circles. Their partnership had developed over the past month into a genuine intellectual collaboration, with Hassan's institutional expertise complementing Maggie's groundbreaking translation discoveries. The presentation they had prepared challenged fundamental assumptions about ancient Egyptian engineering knowledge, while offering practical solutions for contemporary excavation safety. The morning session focused on traditional approaches to hieroglyphic interpretation, with established scholars presenting refinements to conventional translation methodologies that had dominated Egyptology for decades. Maggie listened with growing frustration as presenter after presenter described techniques that missed the literal engineering content she had identified in pyramid texts. Their interpretations consistently relegated technical instructions to symbolic or religious categories, perpetuating exactly the kind of misunderstanding that had contributed to her daughter's death. Dr. Richard Blackwood commanded attention from the front row of the main auditorium, his imposing presence and reputation for scholarly excellence marking him as one of the conference's most influential participants. His recent publications on pyramid construction had established him as a leading authority on ancient Egyptian architectural symbolism, though Maggie knew that his translations contained fundamental errors that had led to dangerous misconceptions about excavation procedures. The irony of their upcoming presentation to someone whose work her research directly contradicted was not lost on her. Professor Elena Vasquez, director of the Metropolitan Museum of Ancient Civilizations, occupied a seat near Blackwood that reflected their professional collaboration on several high-profile excavation projects. Their partnership had produced publications that enhanced both their reputations while shaping institutional policies that governed archaeological practices throughout the field. Neither realized that the elderly woman they had dismissed months earlier possessed research that could expose serious flaws in their established methodologies. The afternoon session dedicated to advanced translation techniques in Egyptian archaeological research represented exactly the forum that Hassan had identified as perfect for presenting Maggie's discoveries. Blackwood's introduction to the session emphasized the importance of rigorous scholarship and peer review in maintaining the field's credibility, though his words carried undertones that seemed designed to discourage challenges to established interpretations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwood announced with the authority of someone accustomed to scholarly deference, "this session will examine innovative approaches to hieroglyphic analysis that demonstrate appropriate respect for established methodology while offering genuine contributions to our understanding of ancient Egyptian culture. We must maintain the highest standards of academic rigor while remaining open to legitimate advances in translation techniques." Hassan approached the presentation podium with documents that represented months of collaborative preparation, her confidence reflecting both her academic credentials and her conviction that Maggie's research contained insights worthy of professional attention. The presentation title, Engineering Instructions Disguised as Religious Metaphor, Reinterpreting Pyramid Construction Texts, had been carefully chosen to indicate serious scholarly intent while hinting at the revolutionary implications of their discoveries. "Colleagues, I want to present research that challenges conventional interpretations of certain hieroglyphic sequences found in pyramid complexes throughout Egypt," Hassan began, her voice carrying across the auditorium with professional authority. This work, conducted in collaboration with independent researcher Margaret Chen, suggests that texts previously classified as religious or ceremonial actually contain literal engineering instructions that ancient builders encoded to preserve technical knowledge. The reaction from the audience was immediate and varied, ranging from polite skepticism to obvious irritation that established scholarship was being questioned by someone working outside recognized institutional channels. Blackwood's expression revealed particular annoyance at the suggestion that his published translations might have missed significant technical content, though professional courtesy prevented him from interrupting Hassan's presentation. Hassan's methodical presentation of Maggie's translation methodology demonstrated sophistication that even skeptical academics couldn't easily dismiss. The charts mapping symbol relationships to architectural principles revealed patterns that had been overlooked by conventional scholarship, while the correlation between hieroglyphic instructions and structural engineering concepts suggested that ancient Egyptian builders possessed knowledge that exceeded modern estimates of their capabilities. These translation revisions indicate that ancient engineers included specific safety protocols in their construction texts, Hassan explained, displaying examples of hieroglyphic sequences that Maggie had reinterpreted as excavation warnings. Passages that conventional scholarship describes as spiritual purification rituals appear to contain literal instructions for safely accessing sealed chambers without triggering protective collapse mechanisms. The silence that followed Hassan's presentation of excavation safety protocols was profound and uncomfortable, as archaeologists throughout the auditorium processed implications that extended far beyond theoretical academic debate. If ancient texts actually contained safety instructions that modern excavation teams were ignoring, the practical consequences could explain recent archaeological accidents that had claimed lives and damaged invaluable historical sites. Dr. James Mitchell, a young archaeologist from the Cairo Museum, raised his hand with obvious excitement about discoveries that could revolutionize field practices. "Dr. Hassan, these reinterpretations could explain structural failures that have puzzled excavation teams for years. Have you attempted to correlate these ancient safety protocols with actual archaeological sites where accidents have occurred?" Hassan's response revealed the personal tragedy that had motivated their research, while maintaining professional composure appropriate for academic presentation. "My colleague Ms. Chen began this research following her daughter's death in an excavation accident at Saqqara 3 years ago. Our analysis suggests that the collapse which killed Dr. Lisa Chen and 3 team members could have been prevented if the excavation had followed safety protocols that were encoded in hieroglyphic texts found at the site." Blackwood's reaction was immediate and defensive, his professional reputation threatened by suggestions that his published interpretations had missed crucial safety information. "Dr. Hassan, these alternative translations represent interesting theoretical speculation, but we must be extremely cautious about claiming that ancient texts contain literal engineering instructions. The archaeological community has thoroughly investigated recent excavation accidents, and structural instability remains the most plausible explanation for unfortunate but unforeseeable collapses." The confrontation between established academic authority and innovative research findings created exactly the kind of tension that conferences were designed to address through scholarly debate. Maggie remained seated in the audience, watching her discoveries being defended by Hassan while recognizing that Blackwood's defensive response confirmed that her research threatened interpretations on which his career had been built. "With respect, Dr. Blackwood," Hassan replied with diplomatic firmness, "our research indicates that ancient Egyptian engineers possessed sophisticated understanding of structural mechanics that has been systematically underestimated by modern scholarship. These texts contain mathematical relationships and construction specifications that demonstrate technical knowledge comparable to contemporary engineering principles." Professor Vasquez entered the debate with questions that reflected administrative concerns about the practical implications of research that challenged established excavation practices. "Dr. Hassan, if these alternative interpretations are correct, they would require fundamental revisions to safety protocols that govern archaeological operations worldwide. What evidence supports claims that ancient engineers actually encoded such specific technical information in religious texts?" Hassan's response demonstrated the thorough preparation that she and Maggie had invested in anticipating exactly these kinds of institutional concerns. Their research included correlation studies that mapped hieroglyphic instructions to actual archaeological sites, revealing patterns that supported their interpretations while explaining structural failures that had puzzled conventional analysis. Professor Vasquez, "Our analysis includes detailed comparison between ancient safety protocols and excavation sites where structural collapses have occurred," Hassan explained, displaying charts that mapped ancient warnings to modern accident locations. "The correlation is remarkably consistent, suggesting that ancient engineers specifically designed protective mechanisms that could be safely bypassed only through precise techniques that they encoded in hieroglyphic instructions." The evidence that Hassan presented was comprehensive and methodologically sound, meeting academic standards that even skeptical scholars couldn't easily dismiss. Maggie's translation work had identified patterns that conventional scholarship had overlooked, while their collaborative analysis had developed arguments that could withstand the rigorous scrutiny that characterized professional peer review. Dr. Ahmed Khalil, a respected Egyptologist from the University of Cairo, approached the microphone with observations that reflected decades of experience with excavation projects throughout Egypt. "Dr. Hassan, your presentation identifies translation inconsistencies that I have noticed in my own work but never been able to resolve satisfactorily. If ancient texts actually contain engineering specifications, they could explain how pyramid builders achieved structural stability that modern engineers struggle to replicate." The support from internationally recognized experts provided exactly the kind of professional validation that Hassan had hoped their presentation would generate. Khalil's endorsement carried particular weight because his excavation experience included direct observation of the kinds of structural problems that Maggie's research addressed through ancient safety protocols. "Dr. Khalil, we believe that ancient Egyptian engineers developed construction techniques through centuries of practical experience, and they encoded this knowledge in texts that would preserve it for future builders," Hassan responded with growing confidence. "Modern archaeology has dismissed these instructions as religious symbolism, but our reinterpretation suggests they contain literal technical information that could enhance contemporary excavation safety." Blackwood's final attempt to discredit research that threatened his established interpretations revealed the defensive reaction of someone whose professional authority was being challenged by discoveries that exposed fundamental errors in his published work. "Colleagues, we must maintain scholarly standards that prevent speculative interpretations from undermining established research. These alternative translations, while creative, lack the institutional peer review that ensures academic credibility." The attack on their research methodology provided Hassan with an opportunity to demonstrate that their work met rigorous academic standards while challenging Blackwood's defensive dismissal of evidence that contradicted his published interpretations. "Dr. Blackwood, our translation methodology follows established linguistic analysis techniques, and our conclusions are supported by empirical correlation studies that map ancient instructions to archaeological evidence. We welcome peer review that evaluates our work based on scholarly merit rather than institutional credentials." Professor Vasquez recognized that the debate had reached a point where administrative intervention was necessary to maintain professional decorum while addressing research that could have significant practical implications for museum and university excavation policies. This discussion raises important questions about translation methodology and excavation safety that deserve thorough investigation. I propose that we establish a review committee to examine these alternative interpretations and assess their implications for contemporary archaeological practices. The proposal for formal institutional review represented exactly the kind of recognition that Maggie's research had been seeking through months of rejections from prestigious museums and universities. Hassan's academic collaboration had successfully transformed independent scholarship into legitimate research that warranted serious consideration from the archaeological establishment. As the afternoon session concluded, Hassan approached Maggie with obvious satisfaction about their presentation's reception and the professional validation it had generated from respected scholars. "Your research has definitely captured the attention of people who can make a difference in excavation policies," Hassan observed with genuine enthusiasm. The review committee that Professor Vasquez proposed could provide the institutional platform necessary to implement safety protocols based on your translation discoveries. The conference reception that evening provided opportunities for informal discussions that often proved more influential than formal presentations, and Hassan guided Maggie through conversations with archaeologists whose work could benefit from insights that challenged conventional interpretations. The networking opportunities represented exactly the kind of professional connections that had been unavailable to independent researchers working outside institutional channels. However, the most significant development occurred when Dr. Mitchell approached them with urgent information that would transform their academic research into immediate practical application. "Dr. Hassan, Ms. Chen, I need to speak with you about an excavation emergency that's developing in Egypt. The international team working at a newly discovered pyramid complex in Saqqara has encountered structural problems that match exactly the kinds of dangers your research addresses." The news that archaeological teams were facing immediate risks that Maggie's research could help address provided an opportunity to demonstrate the practical value of their translation discoveries. Mitchell's description of structural instability and excavation challenges created exactly the kind of crisis where ancient safety protocols could prove whether their interpretations contained legitimate engineering solutions. The team has been experiencing repeated minor collapses that suggest major structural failure could occur without warning, Mitchell explained with obvious concern for colleagues whose lives could depend on finding solutions to excavation problems that conventional engineering approaches hadn't been able to resolve. They're working with time pressure because funding authorization expires next month, but current excavation methods appear to be triggering exactly the kinds of protective mechanisms your research describes. Margaret Chen felt the familiar chill of recognition as Mitchell described excavation problems that mirrored the circumstances surrounding her daughter's death 3 years earlier. The opportunity to prevent similar tragedies by applying ancient safety protocols to contemporary archaeological challenges represented exactly the kind of practical validation that could prove her research contained life-saving information rather than merely theoretical academic insights. Dr. Mitchell, if the excavation team is willing to consider alternative approaches based on ancient engineering instructions, our research could provide specific protocols that might resolve their structural problems while ensuring team safety, Maggie replied with quiet intensity. The hieroglyphic texts contain detailed procedures for accessing pyramid chambers without triggering collapse mechanisms that ancient builders designed to protect sacred spaces. The possibility that their academic research could immediately prevent archaeological disasters provided exactly the kind of real-world application that would demonstrate the practical value of challenging established interpretations. Mitchell's invitation to consult on active excavation problems represented an opportunity to transform theoretical translation discoveries into applied engineering solutions that could save lives and unlock secrets that had remained hidden for thousands of years. The emergency conference call connecting Chicago to the Saqqara excavation site crackled with satellite interference, but the urgency in Dr. Mitchell's voice came through clearly as he described the deteriorating situation facing the International Archaeological Team. Margaret Chen sat in the Northwestern University Communications Center, her translation materials spread across the table, while Professor Vasquez and Dr. Hassan monitored the conversation that could determine whether ancient engineering wisdom would be applied to prevent a contemporary disaster. The situation has become critical since yesterday's minor collapse, Mitchell reported from the excavation command tent, his words carrying the tension of someone coordinating emergency responses while racing against time and structural instability. We've lost access to the primary entrance shaft, and ground-penetrating radar indicates that the support structures throughout the complex are showing stress patterns that could trigger a major cave-in at any moment. The video feed from Saqqara displayed the excavation site in harsh afternoon sunlight, revealing sophisticated modern equipment positioned around ancient stone structures that had withstood thousands of years, only to face potential destruction from contemporary archaeological techniques. Maggie studied the images with professional recognition, identifying architectural features that matched descriptions in hieroglyphic texts she had been translating for 3 years. Dr. Richard Blackwood's presence on the emergency call reflected his institutional authority over international excavation projects, though his resistance to alternative approaches had become more pronounced as the crisis developed. Dr. Mitchell, we need to focus on established engineering solutions rather than experimental interpretations of ancient texts. The safety of 12 team members cannot depend on untested theories about hieroglyphic construction instructions. Professor Elena Vasquez recognized that the emergency represented exactly the kind of situation where innovative approaches deserved serious consideration, particularly when conventional methods had failed to resolve structural problems that threatened both human lives and invaluable archaeological discoveries. Dr. Blackwood, given the severity of the situation, we should evaluate all available options, including alternative interpretations that might provide insights unavailable through traditional engineering analysis. The tension between established academic authority and innovative research solutions created exactly the kind of institutional conflict that Maggie had encountered throughout her investigation into the circumstances surrounding her daughter's death. Blackwood's defensive reaction to suggestions that ancient texts contained practical engineering information reflected the same dismissive attitude that had prevented recognition of safety protocols that could have saved lives. Professor Vasquez, with respect, this is not the time for academic experimentation, Blackwood insisted with the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected major archaeological projects. We have consulting engineers from 3 universities analyzing the structural problems, and their recommendations follow established safety protocols that have been proven effective in similar situations. Dr. Sarah Hassan entered the debate with diplomatic firmness that reflected her commitment to ensuring that Maggie's research received fair consideration, despite institutional resistance from scholars whose reputations depended on maintaining established interpretations. Dr. Blackwood, Ms. Chen's translation work specifically addresses the kinds of structural problems that the excavation team is experiencing. Her research identifies ancient safety protocols that could provide solutions unavailable through conventional engineering approaches. The satellite connection carried Mitchell's response with static that emphasized the remote location, where 12 archaeologists faced immediate danger from structural collapse that conventional expertise hadn't been able to prevent. Dr. Hassan, we're willing to consider any approach that might resolve these problems safely. The team includes experienced professionals who understand both the risks and the potential value of the discoveries we're trying to protect. Maggie recognized the moment when her years of solitary research would either prove its practical value or remain forever relegated to academic speculation. The structural problems Mitchell described matched exactly the dangers that ancient Egyptian engineers had encoded in hieroglyphic warnings, and her translations contain specific instructions for resolving exactly these kinds of excavation challenges. Dr. Mitchell, the hieroglyphic texts found at pyramid sites throughout Egypt contain detailed descriptions of protective mechanisms that ancient builders designed to prevent unauthorized access to sacred chambers. Maggie explained with quiet authority, her voice carrying across the satellite connection with professional confidence. These mechanisms can be safely bypassed using precise techniques, but only if excavators follow exact protocols that the ancient engineers specified in their instruction texts. The silence that followed Maggie's explanation reflected the gravity of a situation where academic theories would be tested against immediate practical challenges that could determine whether people lived or died. Blackwood's skepticism remained evident, but the deteriorating conditions at Saqqara had created circumstances where conventional approaches had already failed to provide solutions. Ms. Chen, these are sophisticated structural engineering problems that require modern technical expertise, Blackwood responded with barely concealed irritation at suggestions that ancient texts could provide solutions that contemporary engineers couldn't develop. The safety of archaeological team members cannot depend on interpretations of symbolic religious writings that may have nothing to do with actual construction techniques. Hassan's defense of Maggie's research revealed the depth of professional conviction that their collaboration had developed through months of rigorous analysis and validation. Dr. Blackwood, our research demonstrates that these ancient texts contain mathematical relationships and engineering specifications that meet modern technical standards. The instructions are literal rather than symbolic, and they address exactly the kinds of structural problems that the excavation team is experiencing. Professor Vasquez made the administrative decision that would determine whether innovative research would be given the opportunity to prove its practical value in circumstances where conventional approaches had failed. Given the urgency of the situation and the potential consequences of structural collapse, I'm authorizing Ms. Chen to provide technical consultation to the excavation team. Dr. Mitchell, please coordinate with Ms. Chen to evaluate whether her research can contribute to resolving the current crisis. The authorization to apply her translation discoveries to active excavation problems represented exactly the kind of recognition that Maggie had been seeking through years of institutional rejection. More importantly, the opportunity to prevent archaeological disasters using ancient safety protocols could validate research that had been motivated by her determination to honor her daughter's memory by protecting other archaeological teams from similar tragedies. Mitchell's relief was audible through the satellite connection as he accepted assistance that could provide alternatives to conventional engineering solutions that hadn't been able to resolve structural problems threatening both human lives and archaeological discoveries. Ms. Chen, we have detailed maps of the excavation site and ground-penetrating radar data that shows the internal structure of the pyramid complex. What information do you need to apply your translation research to our specific situation? Maggie's response demonstrated the practical preparation that had characterized her research from its beginning, with translation work focused specifically on real-world applications rather than purely theoretical academic analysis. Dr. Mitchell, I need to examine the hieroglyphic inscriptions that have been documented at your site, particularly texts that describe the chambers you're attempting to access. The ancient engineers encoded specific instructions for each pyramid complex, and the safety protocols vary depending on the architectural design and protective mechanisms that were installed. The technical consultation that followed revealed the sophisticated understanding of ancient engineering principles that Maggie had developed through her investigation into pyramid construction texts. Her questions about excavation techniques, support structure placement, and access route selection demonstrated knowledge that exceeded the expertise of consulting engineers who had been unable to resolve the structural problems threatening the archaeological team. The ground-penetrating radar data suggests that you've encountered a protective mechanism that ancient builders called a guardian collapse system, Maggie observed. Analyzing the structural information that Mitchell transmitted through secured satellite communication, these systems were designed to seal chambers permanently if accessed through unauthorized methods, but they can be safely bypassed using techniques that the hieroglyphic texts describe in detail. Hassan monitored the consultation with growing excitement as Maggie's translations provided specific technical solutions to engineering problems that had baffled contemporary experts. The practical application of ancient wisdom to modern challenges demonstrated exactly the kind of breakthrough that could revolutionize archaeological practices, while validating research that challenged established academic interpretations. Ms. Chen, your analysis matches structural features that our engineers identified but couldn't explain, Mitchell reported with obvious enthusiasm about discoveries that could transform the excavation from dangerous failure to successful breakthrough. The access routes you're describing follow exactly the paths that ground-penetrating radar suggested might be stable, though our engineering consultants couldn't determine why those particular routes would be safer than direct approaches. Blackwood's continued resistance to approaches that threatened his established interpretations created tension that reflected broader institutional conflicts between innovative research and academic conservatism. This consultation is highly irregular and potentially dangerous. We cannot risk team members' safety on untested interpretations of ancient texts that may bear no relationship to actual engineering reality. Professor Vasquez recognized that the emergency had reached a point where leadership decisions would determine both immediate safety and long-term institutional policies regarding alternative research approaches. Dr. Blackwood, conventional engineering analysis has been unable to resolve these structural problems, and time constraints require that we evaluate all available options. Ms. Chen's research deserves consideration based on its potential to contribute solutions that could save lives and protect invaluable archaeological discoveries. The moment had arrived when Maggie's research would transform from academic theory to practical application under circumstances where failure could result in deaths that would mirror the tragedy that had motivated her years of investigation. Her translation work contained instructions that could either prove the value of challenging established interpretations or demonstrate the dangers of abandoning proven engineering approaches. Dr. Mitchell, The hieroglyphic texts specify that Guardian collapse systems can be deactivated using a sequence of precise structural modifications that must be performed in exact order. Maggie explained with professional calm despite the enormous stakes involved in applying her discoveries to protect lives. The ancient engineers designed these systems to respond to specific trigger combinations that would identify authorized access attempts. The instructions that Maggie provided were detailed and technically sophisticated, demonstrating understanding of structural mechanics that contemporary engineers could verify through established analytical methods. Her translations specified load-bearing calculations, support placement requirements, and excavation sequences that addressed exactly the problems that had created the current crisis. Hassan documented the consultation process with awareness that their collaborative research was being tested under circumstances that would either validate their academic work or expose fundamental flaws in their interpretations. The practical application of ancient engineering knowledge to contemporary archaeological challenges represented exactly the kind of breakthrough that could reshape understanding of both historical capabilities and modern excavation practices. The deactivation sequence requires that you modify the support structures in the main access tunnel according to specifications that compensate for the architectural loads that trigger the collapse mechanism, Maggie continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose research had prepared her for exactly these kinds of practical applications. The ancient texts include mathematical relationships that ensure structural stability throughout the process if the modifications are performed correctly. Mitchell's team began implementing Maggie's instructions with careful attention to specifications that differed significantly from conventional engineering approaches, but addressed structural problems that established methods hadn't been able to resolve. The collaboration between ancient wisdom and contemporary technology created exactly the kind of innovative solution that could prevent disaster while advancing archaeological understanding. Ms. Chen, the modifications you specified are having immediate effects on the structural stability measurements, Mitchell reported with growing excitement as ground-penetrating radar displayed changes that confirmed the effectiveness of approaches based on ancient engineering knowledge. The stress patterns that indicated imminent collapse are beginning to normalize, and we're detecting access routes that weren't visible through conventional analysis. The success of Maggie's technical consultation provided validation that exceeded her most optimistic expectations for recognition of research that had been dismissed by every prestigious institution she had approached. More importantly, the prevention of structural collapse that could have killed 12 archaeologists demonstrated that her investigation into her daughter's death had produced insights capable of protecting other families from similar tragedies. Blackwood's reaction to the successful application of alternative research approaches revealed the defensive response of someone whose professional authority had been challenged by discoveries that exposed limitations in established academic interpretations. These results could be coincidental, and we must be extremely cautious about attributing success to untested translation theories rather than standard engineering principles. Professor Vasquez recognized that the emergency consultation had produced results that deserved serious institutional attention, regardless of academic politics that might prevent recognition of innovative research contributions. Dr. Blackwood, the effectiveness of Ms. Chen's recommendations suggests that her research contains legitimate insights that warrant thorough evaluation by our academic review processes. The satellite connection carried Mitchell's final report with static that couldn't obscure the relief and excitement of someone whose team had been saved from immediate danger while gaining access to archaeological discoveries that had been threatened by structural collapse. The deactivation sequence has been completed successfully, and all team members are safe. We now have stable access to chambers that contain hieroglyphic inscriptions and artifacts that appear to be remarkably well preserved. Margaret Chen absorbed the news of her successful consultation with quiet satisfaction that her years of research had finally proven their practical value in circumstances that mattered most. The prevention of archaeological disaster using ancient safety protocols validated translation work that had been motivated by personal tragedy but had evolved into scholarship capable of protecting lives and advancing human understanding of historical achievements. The emergency had demonstrated that innovative research deserved recognition based on its ability to contribute solutions to problems that established academic approaches couldn't resolve. Maggie's translations had provided exactly the kind of practical insights that could bridge thousands of years of lost knowledge, while preventing contemporary tragedies that resulted from incomplete understanding of ancient engineering wisdom. Hassan approached Maggie with professional respect that reflected both personal admiration and recognition that their collaboration had achieved breakthrough results under the most demanding circumstances possible. Your research has just saved 12 lives while unlocking archaeological discoveries that could reshape our understanding of ancient Egyptian engineering capabilities. This consultation proves that your work deserves the institutional recognition it has been seeking. The successful application of Maggie's research to prevent excavation disaster represented more than academic validation. It demonstrated that challenging established interpretations could produce insights capable of protecting human lives while advancing archaeological understanding. The crisis at Saqqara had provided exactly the kind of real-world test that proved the practical value of research that institutional gatekeepers had dismissed as amateur speculation. The discovery chamber beneath the Saqqara pyramid complex revealed treasures that exceeded every expectation of the international archaeological team, with pristine hieroglyphic inscriptions covering walls that hadn't seen light for over 4,000 years. Dr. Mitchell's excited reports from Egypt described artifacts and texts that would require decades of study, but the immediate priority involved documenting evidence that could expose the systematic negligence responsible for recent archaeological disasters throughout the region. Margaret Chen reviewed the transmitted photographs of hieroglyphic inscriptions, with growing certainty that her translation discoveries had unlocked not just ancient engineering wisdom, but also proof of contemporary corruption that had cost lives. The chamber walls contained detailed construction records that documented exactly the kinds of safety protocols her daughter's excavation team had ignored, along with warnings about excavation techniques that matched precisely the methods that had caused the fatal collapse 3 years earlier. Professor Elena Vasquez convened an emergency meeting at Northwestern University that included representatives from major archaeological institutions, museum directors, and government oversight agencies whose policies governed international excavation projects. The successful resolution of the Saqqara crisis had elevated Margaret Chen's research from academic curiosity to urgent institutional concern, particularly as her translations revealed patterns of safety violations that extended far beyond isolated incidents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Professor Vasquez announced to the assembled administrators and scholars, "we are facing evidence of systematic misinterpretation of ancient safety protocols that has contributed to preventable archaeological accidents throughout Egypt and other excavation sites worldwide. Ms. Chen's research demonstrates that we have been ignoring explicit engineering instructions that could have protected our colleagues and preserved invaluable historical sites. The revelation that established translation methodologies had systematically missed crucial safety information created immediate pressure for institutional reforms that would acknowledge the practical value of alternative research approaches. More significantly, Margaret Chen's work had exposed patterns of negligence that suggested some archaeological leaders had prioritized career advancement and publication schedules over team member safety and proper excavation procedures. Dr. Richard Blackwood's position had become increasingly precarious as evidence mounted that his published interpretations had missed critical engineering content that could have prevented deaths and structural damage at excavation sites under his supervision. His attempts to discredit Margaret Chen's research had crumbled in the face of practical results that demonstrated the accuracy of her translations and the inadequacy of conventional academic approaches to pyramid engineering texts. The institutional implications of these discoveries require immediate investigation, declared Dr. Amanda Torres, the government oversight coordinator responsible for archaeological safety standards. If established translation methods have consistently misinterpreted ancient safety protocols, we need to review every excavation project that has experienced structural problems or team member casualties over the past decade. Margaret Chen sat quietly in the conference room, surrounded by institutional leaders whose recognition of her work represented vindication that had taken 3 years to achieve. Her translation research had progressed from rejected amateur speculation to essential institutional knowledge, but the personal satisfaction came from knowing that her daughter's death had contributed to discoveries that would protect future archaeological teams from similar tragedies. The investigation that followed revealed corruption and negligence that exceeded even Margaret Chen's worst suspicions about the circumstances surrounding her daughter's death. Dr. Blackwood had repeatedly approved excavation procedures that violated ancient safety protocols while suppressing translation work that identified risks to team members and archaeological sites. His pursuit of prestigious discoveries and publication opportunities had created a pattern of reckless decision-making that had claimed multiple lives over several years. The evidence against Blackwood included suppressed reports from junior archaeologists who had questioned excavation methods, ignored warnings from local experts familiar with traditional excavation techniques, and falsified safety assessments that concealed structural problems at sites under his supervision. Most damning, his personal correspondence revealed that he had been aware of alternative translation interpretations, but had dismissed them to protect his academic reputation and career advancement prospects. Dr. Sarah Hassan's testimony to the investigation committee provided crucial academic validation for Margaret Chen's research, while documenting the institutional barriers that had prevented recognition of work that could have saved lives. The archaeological establishment has been systematically resistant to alternative interpretations that challenge established scholarship, even when those alternatives contain information critical to team safety and excavation success. Hassan explained to investigators who were beginning to understand the scope of academic negligence that had contributed to preventable disasters. The international archaeological community responded to the investigation revelations with comprehensive reforms designed to prevent future negligence, while ensuring that innovative research received appropriate consideration regardless of its source. Margaret Chen's translation methodology became required study material for excavation safety certification, while her discoveries about ancient engineering knowledge were incorporated into standard archaeological training programs. Professor Vasquez approached Margaret Chen with formal recognition that acknowledged both her scholarly contributions and her persistence in pursuing research that institutional gatekeepers had attempted to suppress. Ms. Chen, your work has not only advanced our understanding of ancient Egyptian engineering capabilities, but has also exposed dangerous gaps in our contemporary excavation practices. The lives you have saved through your research represent the highest achievement possible in archaeological scholarship. The Metropolitan Museum of Ancient Civilizations, which had initially rejected Margaret Chen's research, extended an official invitation for her to join their translation team as a senior consultant, with authority to review and revise established interpretations of pyramid engineering texts. The position included access to collections and resources that would have accelerated her research exponentially if they had been available during her years of solitary investigation. Tom Rodriguez, the security guard who had processed Margaret Chen's initial visitor request, approached her during the museum ceremony, honoring her contributions, with obvious embarrassment about his dismissive treatment of someone whose expertise had exceeded that of the institution's most credentialed scholars. "Ma'am, I want to apologize for not recognizing the importance of your work when you first visited our museum. Your research has taught all of us that expertise doesn't always come with traditional credentials." The civil lawsuit filed against Dr. Blackwood and the institutions that had enabled his negligence resulted in unprecedented settlements for the families of archaeological team members who had died due to preventable safety violations. The legal proceedings established precedents that held academic leaders accountable for ignoring safety protocols while prioritizing publication schedules and career advancement over team member protection. Margaret Chen testified during the legal proceedings with quiet dignity that honored her daughter's memory while ensuring that the circumstances of her death would contribute to preventing similar tragedies. Dr. Lisa Chin died believing that the excavation procedures being used at Saqqara followed established safety standards. The truth is that those procedures violated ancient engineering protocols that could have protected her and her colleagues if institutional leaders had been willing to consider alternative translation interpretations. The financial settlements provided resources for Margaret Chen to establish the Lisa Chin Memorial Foundation for Archaeological Safety, an organization dedicated to promoting research that bridged ancient engineering wisdom with contemporary excavation practices. The foundation's work ensured that her daughter's death would be remembered through ongoing efforts to protect archaeological teams while advancing human understanding of historical achievements. Dr. Blackwood's academic career ended in disgrace, as universities and museums throughout the world withdrew their support for research that had been built on inadequate translation methods and dangerous excavation policies. His conviction on charges of criminal negligence and conspiracy to violate safety regulations resulted in imprisonment that reflected the severity of decisions that had cost lives while enriching his professional reputation. The broader institutional reforms that followed Margaret Chen's discoveries transformed archaeological education and practice worldwide, with new requirements for translation accuracy and safety protocol compliance that prevented the kinds of negligence that had characterized Blackwood's supervision of excavation projects. Ancient engineering texts became required study materials for all archaeological teams working at pyramid sites, while Margaret Chen's methodology was adopted as the standard approach for interpreting technical content in hieroglyphic inscriptions. Dr. Mitchell's team in Egypt continued their work at the Saqqara complex using excavation techniques based on ancient safety protocols, achieving discoveries that revolutionized understanding of Egyptian engineering capabilities, while maintaining perfect safety records that demonstrated the practical value of combining historical wisdom with contemporary archaeological methods. Their success proved that respecting ancient knowledge enhanced rather than hindered modern scholarly achievement. The memorial service for Dr. Lisa Chen, held 3 years after her death, included colleagues from around the world who had benefited from safety improvements that resulted from her mother's research. Professor Vasquez delivered remarks that acknowledged how Lisa's tragic death had ultimately contributed to discoveries that protected countless other archaeological team members from similar dangers. Dr. Lisa Chen's death was a tragedy that should never have occurred, Professor Vasquez told the gathered archaeologists and academics. However, her mother's response to that tragedy has produced research that honors Lisa's memory by ensuring that ancient engineering wisdom protects future generations of scholars who dedicate their lives to understanding human history. Margaret Chen accepted recognition from the International Archaeological Safety Council, with gratitude that her solitary research had achieved institutional validation while accomplishing the goal that had motivated her investigation from its beginning. Her work had transformed from personal quest for justice into scholarly contribution that would protect archaeological teams for decades to come. The techniques Margaret Chen had developed for interpreting ancient engineering texts became foundational elements of archaeological education worldwide, ensuring that her discoveries would continue protecting lives while advancing human understanding of historical achievements. Her translation methodology proved that challenging established academic interpretations could produce insights that saved lives and unlocked secrets that had remained hidden for thousands of years. The elderly woman, who had been dismissed by every prestigious museum as an amateur enthusiast, had proven that genuine expertise transcended institutional credentials, while demonstrating that persistence in pursuing truth could overcome academic gatekeepers who prioritized professional status over scholarly accuracy. Margaret Chen's legacy continued through ongoing research that bridged ancient wisdom with contemporary archaeological practice. The final irony was both profound and satisfying. The woman who had been rejected by the Metropolitan Museum of Ancient Civilizations because she lacked proper credentials had possessed knowledge that exceeded that of their most celebrated scholars. While her research had exposed dangerous incompetence among academic leaders whose reputations had been built on inadequate translation methods and reckless excavation policies. The hieroglyphic inscriptions that Margaret Chen had decoded in public libraries and community college computer labs contained engineering wisdom that had been waiting thousands of years for someone with sufficient expertise and determination to unlock their secrets. Her discoveries proved that ancient Egyptian engineers had possessed knowledge that could still protect and guide contemporary archaeological teams if modern scholars possessed the humility to learn from civilizations they had consistently underestimated. Years later, when young archaeologists studied translation techniques that had revolutionized excavation safety, their instructors would tell them about the retired woman whose daughter's death had motivated research that challenged every established interpretation of ancient engineering texts. Margaret Chen had proven that the pursuit of truth required courage to question authority, while demonstrating that genuine scholarly achievement measured success through lives saved rather than careers advanced. The pyramid texts that had concealed their engineering secrets for millennia had finally found an interpreter whose expertise and determination were sufficient to unlock wisdom that bridged thousands of years of human knowledge. Margaret Chen's legacy ensured that ancient engineering protocols would continue protecting archaeological teams while honoring the memory of a daughter whose death had inspired discoveries that transformed contemporary understanding of both historical capabilities and modern scholarly responsibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.